and thanks for joining us. So today we're super excited to have Maude Phipps from Monash University, and she'll be talking about culture, genetic history, and health of indigenous populations in Malaysia. So.
Thank you very much, Cody. Can you hear me? It's nice, small, cozy room. Thank you very much for being here. I'm excited. This is my first talk at Stanford University. This august place is 8,000 beautiful acres around you. I would like to start off by acknowledging a few people. Terima kasih is in Bahasa Malay language, means accept my love. Terima is accept, kasih is love or affection. Thank you, basically. And first on the list, Carlos Bustamante here and Mark Seilstedt, my host at UCSF and longtime collaborator. I'd like to thank the Orang Asli communities of Malaysia, without whom I wouldn't be here today and doing this work with them. JAKWA is the Jabatan Kebajikan Orang Asli, which is the Indigenous Development Department of Malaysia. So they are a central department that looks to indigenous health and development. Monash University for giving me leave to be here. My HDR students, past and present. And present, I would like to acknowledge that a lot of my talk is going to be about the work of Farhang Agakanian, one of my PhD students at the moment. Acknowledging also my international collaborators. I enjoy collaborating with international researchers, in particular Tim Jinam, Saito Nariya in Japan, Mark Stone King at the Max Planck, and also my scientific family, which is part of the Human Genome Organization Pan-Asia Consortium. There's 40 institutions, 10 countries, and about 80 odd of us. Cardiometabolic and Indigenous Health Cluster, I would like to acknowledge, and these are the people I work with at home. We have a cluster at Monash University, Sunway Campus, Malaysia, and these are the people. Anwar Zaini, who's the head of the school, right down to Mr. Chui, who is our super-duper technician. So I'd like to just start off with thanking these people first, and some of them are here. This is the team, and this photograph was taken at a village of these Peninsular people. This man and his children, they are part of the indigenous communities of Malaysia. Okay. So having said that, just a few quotes from indigenous communities. I mean, for the longest time, I think it would not be untrue to say that these communities have been at the periphery of a lot of scientific work and investigation, apart from anthropology. And also for the longest time, I think we have really not taken into cognizance their wisdom and their simple ways. So these are some quotes from indigenous people, and they are not from my part of the world, but some of them from this part of the world. And Chef Oren Lawrence has been quoted by saying, although we are in different boats, you in your boat and we in our canoe, we share the same river of life. Quite interesting, profound. Rigoberta Menchú feels that we are not myths of the past or ruins in the jungle or zoos. We are people and we want to be respected, not to be victims of intolerance and racism. And this is a Quechua greeting during Inca times in those days, and basically it translates to don't lie, don't cheat, don't be lazy. So with this, there's a lot of common things we have with indigenous communities, and yeah, we're together here. Okay, I'd like to start off with the Orang Asli. Any of you have been to Malaysia or that part of the world? Yeah. You speak Bahasa?
No, I just
okay.
didn't care.
Right, okay. Right. So Orang again, you know, you've heard of orangutans, right? So Orang is man or person or human. Orang Asli or Orang Asal. Some texts call them Orang Asal, but it literally means original peoples. So Orang is people and Asli is original, the origins. And they are indigenous to the Peninsular Malaysia. So Malaysia is comprised of two sections. One is the Peninsula, which we call West Malaysia, and that's the extension of the Indo-Chinese mainland, right, just before Singapore. And then on the other side, on the island of Borneo, we have the states of Sabah and Sarawak. This is northern Borneo. Okay? But the Orang Asli are particular to Peninsula. I've done some work with the natives of Borneo as well, but I don't think I'm going to present it so much today on those, okay? So I structured my talk, which hopefully will take more than 40 minutes or so. I don't want to bore you. We give some time for questions. To cover three broad areas. Firstly is talking you through some of the demographics and some culture of these peoples. Then we take a short look at the genetic history, and this is derived from the publications that we've had over the past few years, and the relationships genetically between these Orang Asli and the other populations where we've done the analysis. And I'll end with some aspects of Orang Asli health, right? So I work in the medical school. This is the Jeffrey Chia School of Medicine. And we try and structure our projects in such a way that it's a win-win situation. We benefit the community as well. Because for the longest time when I was talking to Aishish about this, we've had too much parachute research. What we term parachute research in this part of the world, where people just parachute in, get all the stuff, the goodies, parachute out, you can do it elsewhere, publish elsewhere, with not much benefit back to the people. So we don't believe in that philosophy. And you know, time is right for us, I think, to think and be doing things in these parts of the world. So the Orang Asli you see here, they are scattered throughout Malaysia, and they are mainly occupying semi-urban areas or villages, so we call them kampong, the word in Malay is kampong, and some are still very much within rainforest habitats. This is in the north of Malaya, where is the Thai border. So there's Thailand and then there's Malaysia on that peninsula. So these people who are more of the hunter-gatherer communities would be in the north, and they would be the Negrito people that are very interested in. We also have the Senoi and also the Proto-Malays. So three large groups, basically, of Orang Asli. And despite the huge morphological, anthropological, and also linguistic diversity in these communities, the genetic structure until several years ago was not really very well known. So I guess that sort of puts me and some of my colleagues in the business to actually find out a little bit more about this. So here we have the classification, and you're okay with me pacing about? I'd rather do that than just stand at the lecture. And we have the Negritos here, and this is the smallest community in the country, and as I mentioned, they still very much follow a semi-nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyle, and they are in the north and isolated areas. And for the Negritos, there are 6 subgroups. So if you like to call this a tribe, then there are 6 sub-tribes, ranging from the Jehai, the Batik, the Kensiu that you saw that went down there, Lano, Mendrik, and Kinta. Okay, so these are the Negrito people. Next on, which is the largest community of Orang Asli, are the Senoi tribe, and they can be further divided into 6 different sub-tribes, ranging from the Mahmari. Mahmari are the closest to my university. It's just an hour's drive to be in the Mahmari settlement. Temia, Semai, Jahot, Chewong, and Semok Mary. And on the other hand, you have the Proto-Malay Orang Asli community. And they are, last count, about 62,000 or so, comprising Orang Seletar. This is near the Seletar Reservoir, close to Singapore. So this is south of the peninsula. Semalai, Temuan, Jakun, Orang Kanak, and Orang Kuala. So that's sort of the 3 tribes, and then the various sub-tribes. Okay. So we have those 3 groups there, and these are the locations of these communities. The Negritos are mainly in the north and the northeast of the peninsula, and this is just showing you some percentage of the population. The Senoi mainly occupy the north, northwest, and central peninsula, and the Proto-Malays are central, a little bit on the east, the Jakuns especially, and the southern regions near Johor, which is near Singapore. All right, and these, of course, these people differ from the indigenous natives of Sabah and Sarawak, which is in Borneo. Because I mentioned this because oftentimes there's been confusion. The Sabah and Sarawakians, probably you've heard of the Dayak or the Iban. These the headhunters, the tattoo artists. Those are in Sabah and Sarawak in Borneo. All right. So these people are a bit different. Okay. So how many are living where? So out of these, the census tells us that there are about, close to 870 Orang Asli communities in the peninsula. And of these, 37 or so percent still are within the rainforest environment. They still live in the rainforests, and they are in areas where you probably have to trek in at least a day, or you've got to take a boat, like we've done with the Negrito community, take the boat up, drive to a jetty up north, and take the boat up the river to the tributaries to find their communities. So these are the more rural communities in the rainforest. The majority live on the forest fringes and what we term rural areas. Okay, these are the kampong areas, more rural, and only less than 2% are in or close to urban centers. So you've actually got to get out of Kuala Lumpur and all the big cities and go out there to actually engage with the people, which is what we actually enjoy doing. So the tribes are different. And in terms of linguistics, we can roughly divide the Orang Asli into those groups or those tribes that speak dialects that are based on the Austroasiatic language, and these are mainly the Negrito people, and the rest of them, the Senoi and the Proto-Malay, that basically speak dialects that are a branch of Austronesian. So if you look at, I'll show you a graph later, or rather a slide later that shows you the Austronesian language groups. This is spoken in majority of Southeast Asia, Austronesian. Okay? Austroasiatic is rather mainland. So there are two types of speakers. In terms of physical appearance, they differ as well. All right? And that's been really useful, I suppose, for the initial British colonialists to actually categorize different groups of Orang Asli. Because in those days, this is during the British colonial days, that started in 1786 or thereabouts till our independence in 1957. We had a department of, there was an Orang Asli protector of the natives. And it was very convenient for them, I suppose, to have to do some sort of categorization to manage their health and so on. So physically, they're quite different. In terms of societal structure, it's also quite different. It can vary between the three tribes, and even sometimes between sub-tribes. And then there's the differences in cultural practices and also beliefs. Okay. So here we are, some variation in physical appearances. So on this end, you see this lady, and she's obviously quite different from the people on that side. And she is from the Negrito community. She's a Jehai, and her village is where they built this. You can see this the building around her. That's a little school that the government's built, and they have one generator there, which is actually nice. So their kids go to that school, and that's been going on for the past, I think, 5 years already. But the rest of the kampong, there's no lights, and there's water from the river. Okay, so this is the Jehai, and obviously she's standing with a baby on this scale because she's never been on a weighing scale before. So we said, it's fine, stand with your baby, and then let me have the baby, and you stand on the scale now, and we did the subtraction. Okay, this is Maude Phipps, all right? So the Maude Phipps community, as I mentioned, is about very close to me, the closest community to our university, and they've got a different sort of system. Physically, they look quite different from the Negrito. You don't get the shorter stature and the very dark curly hair and dark skin. They are sort of intermediate, all right? This is a man who lives in a fishing village. He's a fisherman by profession. He is Proto-Malay. And these are the people near Singapore, just across the border in Johor. And these are also Proto-Malay children. Okay? So you can see that physically, they do look different from each other. In terms of societal structure and habitats, we have, as I mentioned, the forest fringe communities that are still very much like this. Very rudimentary huts up north and parts of northeast. Okay, and this is attic. It's attic roofing. It's something typical that you see in a lot of communities that are, native communities in different parts of the world. So you have this sort of community that tends to be more egalitarian, not so much hierarchical. And then you have this community here, and this is the Maude Phipps, And this is Rumah Moyang. This is the ancestral house they do their rituals in. And they're quite hierarchical, and they have this Hari Moyang every year. It's around, it depends on their calculations, but usually around mid-March, where they welcome everyone to their village, and they do the dancing and the rituals and the purification and things like that. So this is the Hari Moyang type of celebration. And this is the kampong that's in Selangor. This is the state where our university is in. So Monash University is international. Our Malaysian campus is in Selangor. So this is Kampung Orang Asli Sungai Bumbung. So this is the community here. That community is Proto-Malay, Fisherfolk, Dangba Bay in Johor. Okay, so and their society is a little bit more. They have a chieftain, and then they have. There's also sign hierarchy, but not as entrenched as here. Okay, so that's a bit different. And this is what's happened the past 10 years. We had a community in Selangor who were initially living in these sorts of very rudimentary huts. And 10 years ago, the state government and the corporations decided to build this massive shopping complex and develop this new township. So it took their land, and they were relocated into these bungalows. The people were relocated to bungalows. This is Damansara area. So some of them sort of moved here because this was all gone, and then they didn't know what to do here. And it's become a social issue which people are looking into very, very seriously. Some just moved back to where they were and put up some makeshift homes. Some remained here, and then the government is thinking of ways to keep them employed, to let them do courses and things like that. But this is something that the transition that happened very, very quickly. Cultural practices are quite different among the Orang Asli people, and they range from people who are still animists and having their traditional cultures and their language, of course. They don't have any written language. It's a spoken language. There's no writing among that community. And then you have those who have been converted to Islam. Because the government is, as you know, Malaysia is largely a Muslim country, and there have been, a lot of evangelical groups that go in there to convert them. And so they range from being Muslims to those who are still animistic. And this is an example of the Mahmari, who are very, very animistic still, and they've actually resisted quite a lot of pressure to become Muslim. They're clinging on to their ways. And they believe in dreams. They believe in messages coming from the other world or the spirits or the ancestors through dreams. And after dreaming, they will start carving. So this is the carvings they make. And each carving might represent a jungle spirit or ancestral spirit or something that's going to bring good luck or something that's going to dispel bad luck. So they have this tradition of carving. And some of their carvings have actually been sold in some cultural centers around the world. Very, very beautiful, with hardwood. So this community, and they have their rituals also by the sea. And if you can see that this is, in a way, very African, it's sort of reminiscent of some, communities in Africa and elsewhere where they wear all these it's made out of bark and leaves and things like that, and then they do these rituals by the seaside. They live on the island, Carry Island. These are some of the music that they make using bamboo. There's a lot of bamboo in the forest, so you can easily get it. And they've got bamboo flutes that they use their nose to blow, and they've got these percussion instruments with bamboo. And they also practice traditional medicine. A lot of medicine men still in the community. We call them pawang. And these are, although it's changing. Our research has shown that they now, when we go to the communities and do the questionnaires, quite a lot of them prefer to go to the hospital rather than go and see the bomo or the pawang. So it's changing with education and with more exposure. It's changing, but they still have a very, very rich tradition of using rainforest cures and herbs and things like that, which I think we're just scratching the surface in terms of research and pharmacology. It's been actually quite interesting. So there's the difference in some cultural practice and some of their beliefs. Okay, now we'll go into the Negrito, and They are Austroasiatic speakers. They are the only ones that speak Austroasiatic. The rest speak Austronesian. And the Negrito communities live in where you see the green areas. Okay, so the green areas are where we find Negrito communities, and there's Kensu, Kintup, and that. So mainly in the north and also the northeast. And that's what they look like generally. Okay, you can see why they're called Negrito. The next community, and this is the largest one, Mamari is just one, there are others as well. Some of them speak Austroasiatic, some speak Austronesian. I should actually correct that slide. Very few speak Austroasiatic, okay? They are actually slash and burn farmers. Negritos are more hunter-gatherers still, and people who Sweden, they go around the jungle getting jungle products for sale. But the Senoi are more farming, and unfortunately, some of them still practice slash and burn. It's the cheapest option. You don't pay people to come and cut down the trees, you just sort of burn them. But more and more, they are sort of taking employment now, rather than doing this slash and burn agriculture. And quite a number have distinguished themselves as wood carvers and the national resources. And some of them actually work in the plantations as well. So we've got a lot of rubber, oil palm plantations, and they've taken on these sorts of jobs. So the sub-tribes will include Makmari on Carry Island and Jewel and Senoi and in Cameron Highlands. And they're very ritualistic. This is bark cloth. So they strip the bark and then they pound it, and then they actually wear the garments. This is the bark cloth that they use for ceremonial purposes, and they also have these masks which they make for their dances and their ceremonies. Okay, now the Proto-Malays were thought to be quite close to the Malays, but they're actually not genetically, they're quite different from Malays. And they are Austronesian speakers, mainly seafarers. You saw some of that village just now, and farmers. And they are concentrated in the south. So you have the Kanaks here, the Seletar, the Koala, and so on. These are more of the southern people, the Proto-Malays. And they are more in the areas where they have got, community halls, they've got electricity coming in, pipe water, and that's so on. It's more urbanized. And it's easier for me to communicate with Proto-Malays. They speak Bahasa Malaysia. It's easy, it's one-to-one. Where else for the Negrito, oftentimes we would need some translators, some anthropologists, okay, to actually help us to work. Okay, so some of the genetics we've done has already been published, and I refer to this early paper that we published as the first paper of the Hugo Pan-Asian Consortium that I mentioned earlier. And I will be actually using some of the material later on. So some of it is from this paper that we published, and this was the largest paper so far to look at Asian populations. Because at the time there was not very much. Of course, there was the Human Genome Project, and then I think other projects as well, HGDP, which really didn't take into account Southeast Asia. Not at all, not by any means. So we decided it was opportune to do some work there, and we got this paper published. It was actually quite rewarding for us, and it was rewarding not so much that it's a wild thing. It was rewarding because it actually brought together scientists from different parts of Southeast Asia. And it was conceived by us, it was done by us, and we published. And it's a resource now that's freely available. You can email me if you want data from it. We did this project on the 50K Epimetric SNP. In the early days when it was all the way to the 50K, that's what we used. And we set up an arrangement with Effie here to give it to us at cost. So that was quite nice. There was a link with industry, and then there was us doing it for ourselves. And what we established during the Pan-Asia project was a host-guest partnership. So because when you have 10 countries and 90 investigators and 40 institutions, you don't have time to write non-disclosure agreements. You don't want to deal with memorandums of understanding. You don't want to deal with memorandums of agreement and legal things and commercial things. So this whole project was based on the science, and it was based on trust. and seem to work. So that's quite interesting. I also use material that we published recently, and this is Farhan's paper. This is my PhD student in genome biology, where we've actually taken a more in-depth look at our onomasta. And Tim and some of my colleagues, we looked at the mitochondria and came up with something that we like to term an early train hypothesis. I'm not sure if any of you have seen these papers, but that one is mainly on mitochondria and a little bit of autosomal data. Okay, so this is a take-home message, one of them from our earlier paper in Science, looking at the genetic history of Asian populations. And this was constructed, and I mentioned Austronesian language, and that's all in green. So you see that whole green in Southeast Asia, the Austronesian speakers. So this indicates to us that, you know, with the exception of India, that is all here, the whole lot of communities in Southeast Asia, and we did about 73 populations or so, follows a monophyletic clade. There is this clade there, and this is the most recent common ancestor. It's grounded here, and it's grounded. This is Yoruba, right? It's as if you could actually walk out of Africa. You're walking and you're walking and you're walking and you're walking into India, and you're going on the coastal route and coming up and then converging in Southeast Asia, and then walking further north to China and Thailand. This is Philippines, Indonesia, ID. Philippines, Thailand, China, and then we have Taiwan, and then Japan. All right, so this was, for the first time we saw this result, and it was quite gratifying in a sense to actually be able to put this together. And this, of course, suggests that very, very strongly that there was indeed a single entry of humans out of Africa into Southeast Asia, rather than various theories at the time of multiple entries or you know, more than one route or multiple routes. So we are quite convinced that the earliest walk out so far, in the absence of other evidence, is this single migration out first, followed by, of course, subsequent migrations later on. Okay, so this is also taken from that paper, where it actually shows the preferred route along the coasts of India. For the populations that we've done, this seemed to be the preferred route, and then coming here, converging here, and then further moving southwards, and further moving northwards as the first trek. Okay, so the story hasn't changed that much, really, and we'll see what the sequencing shows us, but that seems to be our little contribution to what we know about human migration. Okay. So this was based on SNPs, as I mentioned earlier, and it was focused very much on autosome, because there was already some work on mitochondria and why at the time, but not much on autosome. So these were some of the conclusions that genetic ancestry, as we well know and do suspect, is correlated with linguistic affiliations and also geography. The relatedness within the ethnic groups or linguistic groups are there despite gene flows. And surprisingly, 90% or more of East Asian haplotypes were found in Southeast Asia or Central South Asian populations. Prior to that, people thought that the migrations went from north to south. There was a lot of that going on from north to south and north to south, but we've shown that probably earlier ones were probably from down to up. Okay? Clinal structure with haplotype diversity decreases as you go from south to north. Okay? And that Southeast Asia was a major geographical source of these Asian populations. So that was just some of the conclusions. Okay. So at the time when, after this, we decided, let's look at mitochondrial DNA and let's time it a little bit better. And this is, of course, probably familiar to you, the lineages, the haplogroups of mitochondria, starting with the L types in Africa, and then we have the Manju and the Nassim lines that migrated out of Africa. Okay, and the molecular clock was calibrated using this sort of substitution rate, 1.37, 0.10 to the 11, and a few people have sort of changed the molecular clock. So we're working on that. And then we wanted to look at the divergence between the L line, rooted in Africa, and also the lineages that sprung forth from the Manju and the Nasi lineages there, which is about 160,000 years or so. Okay? So that was the coalescence time, 50,000 or so. So what we got, and this is, I'll just do this quickly. Okay. Right. So when we looked at some of our communities, we didn't do all of them, we looked at some of them. The Jehai, again representing the Negritos, the Temuan representing the Proto-Malays, the Seletar, and also one group from Borneo, who are the Bidayos. We found that they had these sorts of haplogroups that were present, the Gs, the Ms, the Es, the F, the R, and the N. And these are just the proportions that you see in these pie charts. Okay? So, haplogroups which are representative of Austronesian expansion, they do account for less than 10% of haplogroup diversity in the Austronesian groups. And this was something that we suspected, but was surprising to many people who had argued for the out of Taiwan hypothesis. At the time, what was very hot was the out of Taiwan hypothesis, saying that Taiwan, the island of Taiwan and that region, is the cradle of the Austronesian language. And it's only after that that these people who spoke Austronesian sort of migrated downwards. What we found it was, no, that wasn't the case. It was earlier, okay? So this is some of them. So here we have a simplified tree of mitochondrial lineages, and these are the haplogroups, and these are particular to Africa still. These are what we find in Asia, and those are the haplogroups that are predominantly found in Europe. Okay, this was at a point in time. And you could actually track some of them on the Asian side. Okay, and these were what we found in our Orang Asli populations, and the Bidayu from Borneo. Okay, PCA. So on the PCA, and in contrast to other types of indigenous groups and also populations in the region, you can see that they're quite different. The Orang Asli groups are quite distinct. So you have a clustering of the Negrito here, and then you have Temuan, which is Proto-Malay. Seletar, Proto-Malay, Bidayu here. All right, so this is based on the mitochondrial haplogroup. And that's how we sort of position them. One is on continental Southeast Asia, this is island Southeast Asia, and then we have Orang Aslis there. Okay. Which actually ties in very nicely with the ancestors here being early and then diverging elsewhere. Okay, so this is the phylogeny and age estimate of the haplogroup, particularly the Manju line, the Manju lineages. And on this end is the time frame, the time scale, 20,000, 40,000, 60,000 years ago. And then here are all these communities, or these individuals that we've typed. And we can see for some of these Orang Asli, you see our Jehai is here, the Temuans are here, the Seletar, the Temuan again, and so on. The divergence happened much earlier than the Austronesian expansion. So this is the Austronesian expansion here, which is about 5 to 7,000 years ago, with the language and out of Taiwan hypothesis, and that's the earlier divergence. Okay. And the same goes for the Manju line, that we can actually date them to much earlier than the Austronesian expansion. So if you look at the red diamonds, they are the earlier ones, and these are what happened a bit later, the divergence of the mitochondrial haplogroups. And again, we found that haplogroups with a mainland origin and the most recent common ancestor were between 30,000 to about 10,000 years before the present. Okay, and particularly these are the haplogroups, the N74B, G1C, and so on. And this has been published already. This is 2012 information. I thought I'd just illustrate the age. Okay. These are the end images. Okay. So it brought us to some sort of hypothesis, some sort of thing that we'd like to put forward for people to think about, of the plausible migrations that have happened in Southeast Asia. So if we start at 80, 60,000 years ago out of Africa, I think it keeps changing, but we'd like to sort of fix it at about 60 to 80 or 60 to 100, it keeps changing. But for the purpose of this paper, we've sort of kept it at about 60. And then you have what we have termed an early train migration that also occurred, and that's the route, okay? So the initial one was from south to north, and then later on another migration that came from north to south, and this is, we term the early train. And then we had this out of Taiwan express train that was later on, and then the present. So that gives us some clue, possible clue about the timing of these migrations that occurred in the region. Okay. I was also very interested in looking at the Negrito diaspora. Okay, so if you look at the Negritos, they're very much similar to the Africans. And you get Negritos in different parts of the world. You get the Jarawa and the Onge people there, and David Wright has worked on the Jarawa and Onge with some of the people in India and elsewhere. And they are also Negrito. Then we have our Jehai here, and then we've got the Negritos of the Philippines. And these are people like the Mamanwa and so on, okay? And very similar in terms of morphology. So in the GBA paper, we sort of had to answer the question, what's happening with our Orang Asli, as well as how are these Negrito related to each other? So for that, we use the Omni 2.5 chip, and we are just finishing off the whole genome sequence, which I will talk about today, but hopefully the paper will be out and have a look at that. So, as I said earlier, now we had a higher density chip from 50,000 to 2.5 million, which is probably an overkill for population genetics, but hey, we have that chip. And we looked at a smaller number of individuals because mainly it was a cost issue as well. The chip's not expensive, quite expensive. So we took 9 communities from these 3 major groups, and then we did the Onge. And we also compared our data with data from Professor Partha Majumdar from the Indian Statistical Institute, who was very kind to actually give us his data that he hasn't actually published yet, to do the comparisons, and also a human diversity panel. Okay, we couldn't actually get Filipino data. Unfortunately, there was some hitch with the funding, and my collaborators in the Philippines actually couldn't proceed forward with the 2.5 only. But nevertheless, we just drew on the earlier data that we had on the 50K. So here we have the Andamanese, here we have the Proto-Malay, and then in there are Senoi, and here we have the Negrito people on this PCA plot. Okay, so it's a contrast to other populations. And if we look further on the PCA, it becomes clear that they are quite well separated into 3 different clusters. Okay, so these are the Negrito peoples. Here, the Malaysian Negritos. Here you get the Andamanese, and then we have the Melanesians and the Papuans. All right, so quite distinct. Yeah. Then we decided to throw in an admixture analysis, and from the admixture, I will draw your attention to the Jehai, the Batik, and the Mandarin, and the Kinta on this area where you see the browns coming out at K4 or thereabouts. And then you have the other Orang Asli here, then you have Malay on this end, and then you have the Central Asia, Dai, the Cambodians, the Mauzi, the Shi, the Han people are there. And on this end, you have the Orawa and the Onge, the pinks. Okay, so harking back to very early ancestries. and also getting a flavor of some of the ancestral components that have actually shaped some of these other communities in that part of the world. Okay, this is a tree mix analysis, all right? And some people really don't like tree mix. Do any of you use tree mix? No, some people don't like it. The critique is that every time you plot a new tree mix with different parameters, it spits out a different tree altogether. But I think a lot of journals now want tree mix in it, so we did tree mix to not be so divergent. So the tree mix actually was quite interesting because it indicated gene flow from the Andamanese people, which are the Onge and the Jurawa here, this one here, linked straight over to some of our Negrito people. Okay, so this is it gave us an added parameter about the relationship between the different Negrito communities. Okay, this is a model of gene flow among the Andamanese, the Papua New Guineans here, the Negrito, Senoi, Proto-Malay, and then East Asians on this end. Okay, and you can see that that there has been gene flow, and these are the proportions that are actually occurring between the Andamanese and the Negrito, and then the Negrito and the Senoi here, and then we have the Negrito to the Proto-Malay even, and then the relationships right here to the East Asians. Okay, so this is just a snapshot that depicts some gene flow. Okay, now as expected in small communities and isolated communities, you will actually get the regions of homozygosity that can tend to be quite low compared to people who are more admixed or less isolated. Okay, so this proved true if you look at the cumulative length of the regions of homozygosity and the number of the regions of homozygosity. You can actually see really, really high there. And this is the linkage disequilibrium decay that was more or less what we expect, okay, for these communities that we have. Okay, so what about those results? And tell you that much about migration, that's well and good. It tells you about the structure of the community. What does it say about selection? What does it say about adaptation? Because they are different habitats altogether from many other communities. Okay, so, and we decided to do a very quick scanning for signatures of selection. This is what we got. Okay, and this is on the SNP data. This is published already last year, and the majority of the signatures seem to be to do with height, as is obvious here. Then you can see blood pressure in the red. We've got about 56 on the immune response. 32 are linked to cardiovascular systems. Melanoma, 8 morphology of hair color, and then there's a bit of malaria, a bit of skin pigmentation, sensitive to sun, and so on and so forth. So this is just a quick snapshot of what were the signatures of the local adaptation.
Different Malaysian groups differing from each other in these phenotypes? Is this different Malaysian groups differing from each other in these?
No, we haven't gone to that level. This is a snapshot of the whole lot of them.
So this is the way they differ from Africans or Europeans?
Yes, that's what we think. This is what's coming out from our SNP data. This is the SNP data, and this is scanning it and looking at signatures of selection, or picking up those that are linked to some of these loci. Okay, so the selective signals that were apparent, they're not all going to be different from the selection that goes on in other populations, I suppose. It's now our job to actually tease out those that are substantially different and ask the question why. Or pick up things that suddenly pop up that we didn't see in other communities. I think that's the challenge there as well, which we're working on. So they were apparent for height, they were very apparent for nervous system development, which I think will also apply to other communities. Enriched for ion transport, and in particular calcium homeostasis in the environment. Muscle fiber contraction, hormone secretions, And in the Negritos particularly, what was interesting was that sodium transport was under selection. We actually did the health, and we found that they were very hypertensive. The Negritos. We thought that being in a forest environment would be relaxed and we would have low blood pressure, but that wasn't actually the case. They were actually the most hypertensive of these communities. So links back to some of these selection mechanisms and the genes that are active to maybe precipitate high blood pressure. So maybe in these communities, what we see as high blood pressure or hypertension that's normal for us is actually shifted to the right of the spectrum of normality. I mean, that's what I'm thinking. Yes.
Do we have health problems associated with hypertension?
Well, this is the first time we found it. I mean, we never had the statistics before, so we didn't know, there wasn't anything before we went and did measurements. So we are finding that's very strong correlation. And first we thought it was white coat syndrome. We thought they were frightened, and then that's why the blood pressure went up. But you know, we've been there for many, many times and we're familiar. So it's not white coat syndrome. It is something inherent and it's some selection. Maybe it's to make them more alert. In a rainforest environment, you probably need to be more alert to listen out for sounds. Tigers, I mean, they get tigers, they're tigers that mold. It's a different thing, so it's actually quite interesting, which I would like to pursue with more funding, what's actually going on there. So, various roles, okay? Wound healing, and so on. All right, so these are some take-home messages about Negritos. They are genetically unique, and they would definitely, I'm sure, carry markers that have been selected for, given their forest environment, given their isolation in the rainforest for so long. Okay, very, very quickly, I'm running out of time. Cardiometabolic risks. This has also been published this year, BMC Public Health. I'll be happy to give you a link if you'd like that paper, or just Google it. And looking at the contrast between the development that's happened very rapidly over 30 years in the country and its impact on the health of our okay, so in a nutshell, we have a national health and morbidity survey that goes on every few years. The last one was in 2008. And we had some alarming statistics, but this didn't cover the Orang Asli community, so we decided to look at these communities. So the national one puts metabolic syndrome at 42%, which is really bad news. Although it's a subset, of course, you're not doing the whole population, it's a representative. And diabetes is about 20. And some communities, in particular the Indian communities, go up to 22% of prevalence. So we had a look at the Orang Asli as part also as our win-win benefiting the community program. So here we have this that's in the rainforest and still looking like this, and some areas where they are, you know, they could be in Macy's. It's that contrast between living in the urban environment and living in the rainforest. So there has been an epidemiological transition that has occurred over the years. So we looked at over 600 participants from the 7 tribes, and we did all these measurements that were easy to do and easy to do in the laboratory. Okay? Height, weight, BMI, waist, blood pressure, triglycerides, glucose, HbA1c, which is a marker of glycemic control, and creatinine and anything else. So statistical analysis using SBS, that's mainly. Okay. So this is just looking at the different sub-tribes that we chose, and some of the gender, the median age, the proportion, and these were the results. So if you look here, this is, on top is obesity in the red, and this is very apparent in the people near Singapore, Danga Bay, the Seletar people, the Proto-Malays. 31.6% obesity, 66% abdominal obesity. So it's changed. Huh? The Mahmari also recorded 27.5%, 31%. Okay. Hypertension. Okay, and I say strangely, hypertension is not really that remarkable in the urban ones, but it gets really bad in the Negrito, which are our forest fringe hunter-gatherer communities. Then we have elevated triglycerides, obvious in the Jakun and the Jehai, here a little bit, 30%. Then fasting glucose, high levels in silica, high HbA1c, silica again, poor glycemic control, prediabetes, and so on. So these people have now become diabetic and pre-diabetic and prone to diabetes. And we get this sort of story in indigenous communities, other parts of the world as well. And in Australia it's been described, and it's been described in America as well, to see this transition of okay. So, obesity and abdominal obesity are now starting to become problematic. Okay? Pre-diabetes and diabetes is now very evident. Some of them that we tested didn't even know they were diabetic, but now hopefully they'll be followed up by, because we work with the health department as well, so hopefully they will get some follow-up. There's only so much metformin you can distribute when you're going for field work. The Negrito said the highest prevalence of hypertension. This is really something I want to actually look in depth, and so on. And then there's that high blood pressure link. Okay, so that's the full impact and some of our recommendations for the government and also these communities. I go back and give them the results, and then we discuss what can be done with the health officers there if they are there. But if they are 2 hours away by boat or 3 hours away by boat, then we make other visits and we get more engaged with them. If they want us back, it's their call. Yeah, it's not ours. Okay, so WGS, I won't say very much except that we're finding lots of novel. And I would really like to see the rare variants coming out here that have never been described, which we'd expect to be linked to genome evolution, health, whatever. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to address any questions. We've got 5 minutes.
What's known about the mating structure of the populations and how much they interact with each other, particularly thinking of the Negrito populations, like it's a fairly small population size.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the Negrito populations do have a taboo against marrying within the same village or that same community. So someone in Belum, that's where this community is from, might have to find someone else if they wanted to marry within the same community in Kedah, which is like 200 miles away or something. So they don't actually encourage intermarriage as such. The Mount Murray are more particular. They don't like this intermarriage thing. So they go and look for Orang Asli communities elsewhere. And it's patriarchal. They bring the women back to the family. Proto-Malays are also not into marrying among their kind. But because some of the groups are really very small, and there's only that limited gene pool there, as we saw from the runs of heterozygosity, you get really high runs. Inevitably, they may well be ending up marrying their relatives from, the 5th generation or something that moved elsewhere, and then nobody remembers who's gone there, and then, you get married. So actually from the Pan-Asia work, we actually published one paper, and some of these relatives actually getting married. So what I do is I try and get the husband and wife as samples to try and reduce the possibility, but it's going to show a small gene pool anyway. Now it's getting a bit more acceptable for them to marry outside. So I've seen some couples from down under in Johor that have married Chinese or they've married Malay. So half ASEAN, half Malay, but they don't do them because they're going to be admixture. So, but we do have that, and generally it is taboo to be married within the same community. What was interesting was, my colleague, Dr. Mahmoud, he's really large and very good at taking blood. And they call him Dracula. Dracula's come again. And so we have these stations. So we set up these stations in the Negrito village. And this station is actually in a bamboo hut. It was the best we could do. It was a bamboo community hall. So after I finished weighing this lady, and she'd gone over to Mahmoud, the minute she finished with Mahmoud, she leapt out of the window. The hut is quite low, okay, so she didn't really damage herself, but she just took a leap out of this window. And I stared at Mahmoud and I said, what did you do to her? He said, no, nothing. So I ran after her, I got out of the hut, ran after her, thinking, my God, did she bleed or something, you know, this bottle. And then my friends ran after me and said, she's gone. Then she said something in Asli and in this Negrito language, and Julie was there, he was the anthropologist, my collaborator, he was also Asli himself, but from a different tribe. And then I said, please find out from her what happened. Did you know, was she sick? Was it very painful? What was it? And then he laughed and he said, oh, don't worry. Her son-in-law turned up. Her son-in-law was the next in line. And they have this taboo that the mother-in-law and the son-in-law cannot be together in the same room. So I said, oh my God, that's all right then. But, you know, because I was just thinking, oh my God, that's the end of my research. I mean, it's going to be so horrible. So they have some of these taboos that prohibit, you know.